Welcome to the Capital News. I am your host, Alex Karitis. Today is March 21st, 2019. Thank you so much for joining me. So the few stories that we're going to get into today is obviously we're going to talk about some Brexit because there was some news that broke this evening. We also want to talk about Trump versus the Federal Reserve Chairman and just really the Federal Reserve in general. I told you this was going to happen. I just didn't know it was going to happen so quickly because just yesterday we had the Fed's meeting and we had the follow-up with Jay Powell's press conference. So it didn't take long for the president to fire back at the Fed, and we'll get into that. And then lastly, I know I've been talking about the Lisa Page story, continuing that saga. So I am going to get into that today because while there were several stories out in the news today, it wasn't anything breaking other than really Brexit in my opinion. And then I just don't want to fall too far behind the eight ball in regards to Lisa Page because I anticipate that there's going to be a lot more coming out in the near future. Plus, there's so much to get through in regards to her testimony, that of Peter Strzok, Bruce Orr, and then some others. And I think there were some other documents that Judicial Watch got their hands on, so I'm going to have to take a look over the weekend and do a deep dive into what documents they have in regards to some fraud, corruption, and I think some more to do with the Clinton email scandal. So let's kick this off with Brexit. So what happened? Well, March 29th deadline just got extended. This should be a surprise to nobody. The UK will be offered a delay until the 22nd of May. The 22nd of May. If members of Parliament approve the withdrawal deal negotiated with the EU next week. If they do not, the EU will back a shorter delay until April 12th. So potentially out to May 22nd. If the Parliament does not vote on what is negotiated with the EU next week, it will be a shorter delay to April 12th. This will allow the UK time to get the deal through or to indicate a way forward. Prime Minister May said there was now a clear choice facing UK MPs who could vote for a third time on her deal next week. So remember, we were told earlier this week that was going to be off the table. Now, because of the pressure that is being applied from the EU and just the whole ton of bricks that is cascading because we're so close to the original March 29th deadline, it appears that there is going to be a third vote in Parliament. Although it's going to be interesting to see. This is a very, very fluid situation. This happened late in the evening, especially over in European time. So what happens tomorrow? How does the Speaker of the UK Parliament, how does he handle this? What is he going to do? It's going to be interesting. This could take place as early as next Monday from early reports that I'm reading, but it's definitely going to take place some point probably next week, unless again, John Bercow, Speaker of the British Parliament, does something rash to stop it. So what are they going to do? Because remember, we were concerned that perhaps Theresa May's counterparts in the EU were going to play it tough, and they were going to say, okay, well, look, we're not going to give you a third chance. It's not going to happen. We gave you a second. You blew it. You couldn't pass your deal for the second time. We're not giving you the third chance. Well, they're giving him an extension, quite possibly to May 22nd. Now, what's interesting is that Theresa May was actually going and trying to get out to June 30th. But they said, no, that's not going to happen. We're cutting it shorter, May 22nd. And there's a reason for that, because May 23rd is the beginning of the EU parliamentary elections. So they just want this to be done and over with, or at least that's the image that they are putting out there. So now we have Donald Tusk and Jean-Claude Juncker of the European Union saying if the UK has not decided by April 12th whether to take part in the elections, the option of a long extension will automatically become impossible. So the Brits, they either get this done next week or it's pretty much April 12th and sayonara, see you later. It also becomes interesting, in addition to what John Bercow, Speaker of Parliament, says, is how Jeremy Corbyn, the leader of the Labour Party, plays this. Because he was also in Brussels today, which is interesting to me because I don't think he was negotiating together with Theresa May. So it's like, what is this guy doing? What is he saying? I mean, is he trying to be counterproductive to Theresa May? Is he trying to push through his deal and that of the Labor parties? I mean, it just seems a little fishy to me as to what's going on. There just seems like a setup for a lot of underhandedness to take place. And don't forget, folks, the EU does not want this to be a smooth transition. Of course, they're going to say and put on a face that they do, but in my gut, the cynical person in me and just the sense of it, they don't want it to be a smooth transition for the British people. Because again, and I've said this many times over, it sends a signal to everybody else in the EU who might be thinking about leaving. Oh, well, it's no problem. If it went smoothly, well, it's no problem. We can just leave. We can say we want a divorce. We want out. We're done. See you later. We'll save our money. We'll continue to trade or whatever they work out. Because, look, that's what the British people did, and they're happy. No problems. Everything went off without a hitch. Obviously, at this point, the politics of it is very difficult, but maybe the economics of it after the fact might not be so bad. And that's what the EU and the bureaucrats in the EU are so afraid of, that it does become smooth sailing. And then it says, well, all right, now we got to keep everybody else in check because we got to keep this together. So we're going to pay attention to this. We'll see what happens tomorrow because there's no doubt there's going to be some more information tomorrow after the members of Parliament, British Parliament, get to digest the news and get to debate it tomorrow. And so I'll keep you guys updated because it continues to fascinate me, and I hope it continues to fascinate you as well, because this is really democracy in action. You put the vote to the people in the referendum. It's going on 2.5, 3 years now. You got to deliver. You have to deliver. You must deliver. Because again, if Jeremy Corbyn somehow makes a maneuver and this thing gets shot down again, he might call for a vote of no confidence or a general election, and then Theresa May and that government could be in a whole world of trouble, and then we have additional drama in addition to the Brexit. So stay tuned. Now, some of the other topics that I want to talk about with in regards to President Trump, typically I would save this and reserve this for the economic podcast, but there's so much overlap. And the reason I do the two podcasts is because I know some of you guys really only like to listen to the political news, which is fine. And then I know there's also some who only like to listen to the economic news, which is fine. That's why I break it up and do both. And obviously then there's my soldiers out there who like both of them. Thank you very much. I love you all. But here's what President Trump has to say. And this is going to be on a longer interview aired, I believe, tomorrow morning with Maria Bartiromo. And so here's what the president is saying. He says, the economy would have grown over 4% instead of 3.1% if the Federal Reserve had not raised rates during 2018. Trump added that he does not care if he, quote, influenced or not the decision to pause on the rate hikes. So I told you this was going to happen. The president likes to point the finger, play the blame game, and I told you this was not his first rodeo in negotiations and doing this, and he was going to do the Potomac two-step, and he was going to try to dance his way around what we know is going to happen, and what candidate Trump knew was going to happen, that this economy, the stock market, both are in a bubble, that the American people, American businesses, the American government is just riddled with too much debt, and it's all in part and thanks to the Federal Reserve and to previous administrations, the Obama administration and the Bush administration in particular. But now we have President Trump. He has, quote-unquote, control of the reins, and now he wants the funny money, evidently. Now he wants to take ownership of the stock market. I told you guys this was a terrible move on his play, but now he has to dance around it, and that's exactly what I said he was going to do, and right now that's exactly what he is doing. Because he's going to say, look, I brought us out of the depths. We were at 1%, 2%, now we're at 3%, above 3%, and if it wasn't for these yoo-hoos down over at the Federal Reserve, it would have been 4%. So, you can't really prove or disprove it. So that's a good argument for him. He's very good at that. Very good at making these types of arguments, and very good at pointing the finger, and obviously he's the President of the United States. He has the bully pulpit. And he ain't afraid to use it. He'll either use his mouth directly with a microphone and cameras, or he'll go to Twitter, or both. So I knew it was going to happen. I guess I shouldn't be surprised it was so soon. It was the next day. But even on this, Maria Bartiromo asked Trump if he influenced the Fed's decision to pause on rate hikes, and he said more fully, quote, "I don't know. I mean, look, I hope I didn't influence, frankly, but it doesn't matter. I don't care if I influenced or not." He's talking out of both sides of his mouth. He's supposed to be a different type of politician. I don't care. I don't know. I mean, maybe. I don't care. Come on, Donald. Come on. Level with the people. Which one do you want? You want the candidate Trump that I was really excited to hear about? I mean, finally somebody on the stage, other than a Ron Paul, talking, and Rand Paul for that matter, talking about the Federal Reserve and talking about how they manipulate the economy and the stock market and how it's a bubble and how zero interest rate policy and printing all this funny money has been the biggest wealth transfer in the history of mankind. I mean, that was all making sense. Now you're president and you do a 180. I don't like it. You're supposed to be draining the swamp. I don't like it. The other thing that has to be stressed, so you guys understand, is the way that GDP is calculated. Okay? It's a basic arithmetic calculation. Government spending is part of that equation. So if you have an increase in government spending year over year, you'll either hear that, obviously it's called the year-over-year change, or some people might refer to it as the delta, which just means change. It's just a arithmetic. It's a Greek symbol, delta, that means change, if you're familiar with mathematics. So the delta, or the change in government spending, if it's an increase, well, if all else is equal, then GDP is going to increase. So by those means, it can be very, very artificial. And when we're running trillion-dollar deficits, and now we know with the president's budget for 2020 of $4.75 trillion, the biggest in our history, with trillion-dollar budget deficits as far as the eye can see, well, it seems to reason that GDP, all else equal, meaning consumption stays the same, investment stays the same, net export stays the same, GDP is going to increase. So it's all fake. It's all debt, because that's what it is. You have a bigger deficit, that means you got a larger debt. So we're just bringing, again, forward growth forward to today. That's all we're doing. Future growth, we're bringing it back to today so everybody can have instant gratification, because nobody wants to let this market, this economy, correct. Why? Because it's going to be painful, and these people know it. But they can't be leaders. They can't be adults. They can't level with us and say, look, we messed up, but we can get through this together, because we're the United States of America. We messed up. We did, royally, but we can get through it. Now, given the rhetoric that we have seen, that just ain't going to happen. It's going to be finger pointing. It's going to be the Federal Reserve's fault. It's going to be everybody's fault except Trump's. Despite the fact that the swamp does not appear to be getting drained anytime soon. The military-industrial complex is just fine. The banks have recorded record profits. Trump's supposed to be the master of the art of the deal. We're supposed to have these phenomenal trade deals. We have trouble with China right now. We were supposed to be getting our trade deficits in order. We have the largest trade deficits in U.S. history. So those are a few bad strikes against the president. Now, you know it's not all bad. I praise this president on a lot of things that he has accomplished, and I'm sure will continue to accomplish. But he doesn't get a free pass. Not with me. So I'm going to stay up on this because I knew it was coming. Oh, man, I can't believe it was so fast, though. He can't wait to blame people. It's just what he does. It's what he does, love him or not. Now, moving forward with this Lisa Page fiasco in the Department of No Justice. Oh, geez, these people make me sick. I'm going to continue reading the transcript, some of it. And again, for those of you who may be joining for the first time or haven't listened to the podcast yet, I read it as it is written. So again, if somebody stutters while they're talking or they pause or break and take it to another direction, that's what I'm going to read it as, just because trying to remember what I've read before and how to break it up is just too difficult, and I'll confuse you. So I just try to read it as it's written and go from there. So I'm going to kick this thing off. And again, this is day 2 of her testimony. And previously we had gone through Congressman Trey Gowdy, his questions, Congressman John Ratcliffe, and Congressman Mark Meadows. This part of the testimony, it's almost more like a freewheeling conversation, and so there's multiple people asking questions, one after the other. So I'm basically, if I go back and forth, I'll just say question answer as opposed to who's talking. Of course, it's Miss Page who's answering all of these questions. This is going to cover everything else that we've already been discussing. The Clinton email investigation, the Trump-Russian collusion, that whole thing. So let me kick this off. Question. Regardless of how phenomenal forensic investigators might be, is it still possible that an extremely sophisticated foreign intelligence service could penetrate a server, could extract documents, could do a number of things without leaving a single forensic footprint? Answer. It's everything is possible, but it's unlikely. I think Friday's indictments are revelatory of that. You don't get much better than the GRU, and yet we have identified by name the people involved in the DNC hacking. So I think it's quite unlikely. Now let me just take a pause here, because she's talking about the crack team in the FBI that's going to do IT forensics on this stuff. And then she also mentions the DNC hacking. So put on your memory caps if you can. And this took place during the 2016 election, fairly right around the time of the nomination, if I remember correctly. But what I want to get to is if you recall the name of Seth Rich. This was a young man who worked for the DNC who was murdered very shortly around that time, the convention and all that stuff, and after this hacking thing came to pass. Because a lot of this information fell into the hands of Julian Assange and WikiLeaks. And Julian Assange was giving an interview, and he did have a slip of the tongue, I believe. And he mentioned to the reporter, he said, our sources, whoever they might be, put themselves at great risk. And he said this in the context of answering questions in regards to the DNC hacking and Seth Rich. So the reporter was on top of this and said, whoa, wait a minute. We're talking about Seth Rich here, and you're saying our sources put themselves in harm's way to get the information that they gather. Does that mean that Seth Rich is your source? And it caught Julian Assange off guard because I believe he knows he misspoke. And it gave the impression that, in fact, Seth Rich was the source. So this then implies that it wasn't the Russians who hacked from afar and downloaded all of this information from the DNC, but rather an insider of Seth Rich who ended up being murdered. And I believe to this day it's still unsolved. So it's very interesting. And then the other thing, I just want to go off a quick side note because this is other information that I've come across over the past couple years researching some of this stuff, and I just remember it. So I just want to share this with you guys because it's fascinating. There is a gentleman by the name of Bill Binney. Bill Binney. He was a former technical director of the NSA who turned whistleblower shortly after 9/11. Because he was of the mindset that the NSA had the tools and the personnel involved there back in 2001 and before that could have prevented 9/11. And they dropped the ball because of bureaucracy and because of favoritism, nepotism, and because people were more concerned about spending as much money as possible on inferior products and data strategies as opposed to what Bill Binney was calling for. Now, the government went after him hard, which they do many times when they go after whistleblowers. And people who follow this know that a lot of times it's the whistleblower that gets messed up. His life gets ruined. He ends up in prison. He ends up bankrupt. He ends up losing his family. Bill Binney, he outsmarted and outwitted the government. He's a free man. The government didn't get him. He knew his stuff. He knew what he was doing. And if you don't take my word for it, that's fine. I always tell you, do your own research. You can find this guy on YouTube. He's given many interviews, has had many speeches and discussions. He's a fascinating guy, mathematical genius, was with the NSA for, I think, 30 some odd years, but just had enough with the politics and the bureaucracy that existed within that agency and said enough's enough. So how does he come in to this DNC hacking? Well, according to him, and he's given several interviews on this, he has had access to this somehow. He claims it's somehow open source. This is beyond me as to what it is, but I mean, this guy was the NSA. He knows how to make some moves. That's on him. But he argues that there is no way that this could have been the Russians or any foreign government or foreign entity whatsoever, because the speed at which the information was downloaded was too quick. It couldn't have went across all of this fiber optic cable thousands and thousands of miles away to another country at that rate at which he says occurred. So what does this mean? It means the findings is it was an inside job, because it couldn't have been somebody thousands of miles away because the data transfer was too quick. So it had to be somebody in front of a computer, in front of a server with a thumb drive. Well, could it have been Seth Rich? This story remains unsolved. Just throwing that out there. It's very interesting. And it's interesting how this comes up again and again, and now we have it here with Lisa Page. So allow me to continue. Question. Are you, following up on what the congressman was saying, are you familiar with a private entity, privately financed, using private forensic resources, for lack of a better word, went looking for some of the emails from Secretary Clinton's server, her network, and in fact found at least one document on a foreign server? Answer. I don't know what you're referring to, no. We were produced information indicating that Mr. Strzok had indicated in an email that at least one secret email was accessed by a foreign party. Are you aware of that? Let me just pause here. We have an email from Mr. Strzok that one secret email was accessed by a foreign party on Hillary Clinton's email server. They know what's going on here. Everybody's lying. The rats are jumping ship. Couldn't be any more clear than this. Let me continue. Miss Page, that may be true. I'm just not personally aware of it. Question. I believe on Friday, in discussing the statute that you were discussing, I believe with Congressman Ratcliffe, it was 793F of Title 18. You had said that that statute was deemed by DOJ to be unconstitutionally vague. Is that correct? No, the gross negligence, the gross negligence standard in 793F, it was their assessment that it was unconstitutionally vague, yes. Were you involved in discussions about, its vagueness? I don't believe so, no. Do you have any idea of why they believed it was unconstitutionally vague? I mean, I presume they looked at case law in which it had been applied. I really don't know. I mean, I am confident that it was based on their own sort of research and consultation with others, but I don't have personal knowledge about what the department did in order to come to that conclusion. Question. Speaking of, so did you or did the OGC do their own evaluation of the statute, or did you just rely on the DOJ's assessment? I don't know. I did not. Question. Speaking of case law, are you aware whether or not that statute has been used in military prosecutions or the frequency with which it was used in civilian prosecutions? I know you had said once in like 99 years. She answers. I think that this is straining my memory now, but I think that there may have been one Uniform Code of Military Justice case in which it was charged, but again, if my memory serves, so I may get this wrong, but if my memory serves, the defendant in that case had actually engaged in far more nefarious and suspicious activity, and so it was a plea down to that, right? So if you're pleading to something, then you don't really need to worry about it. I mean, if it's unconstitutional, it's still unconstitutional. But it was not the case. Again, my recollection is that it was somebody who had a hoard of classified information and then, when confronted, tried to destroy the classified information, sort of, again, the indicia of knowledge and criminal intent that you will sometimes see. So, if I'm not mistaken, there was one UCMJ case, but I think that's it. All right, pause. Did you hear what was just said? Let me restate this for you. Again, my recollection is that it was somebody who had a hoard of classified information and then, when confronted, tried to destroy the classified information, sort of, again, the indicia of knowledge and criminal intent that you will sometimes see. You mean like Hillary Clinton? She had all of her emails on her private server where it was not supposed to be, where it was not approved, in her house, in New York, in her bathroom. Not secured, not maintained by the United States government, in her home. She had them all. I would classify that as a hoard. She has them all. And then, when confronted, tried to destroy the classified information. Sort of, again, the indicia of knowledge and criminal intent that you will sometimes see. You mean like being subpoenaed? And then deleting 33,000 of those emails? Oh, but we're not going to prosecute her because she said, oh, I didn't know they were classified. And we couldn't refute it. Department of No Justice. This is disgusting. How can we continue as a people that claims to be free? Because we ain't. These criminals are walking around free, but they get to have their lives of luxury, and everybody else is getting screwed 2 ways to Sunday. This is ridiculous. I mean, how can these congressmen not even have called her out on this? Because they don't. At least not through what I have gotten through yet. Where is it? This was a year ago. She said exactly what Hillary Clinton did. Yet somebody else got in trouble for it, but she doesn't. Unbelievable. Unbelievable. Cannot make it up. Question. So, speaking of a hoard of classified information, do you mean information that was hard copies of physical documents? Answer. Hard copies, and I think even like, if I'm remembering right, and I could be mixing this up with another case, but like a thumb drive of classified information that they were not authorized to have, like Hillary Clinton not being allowed to have that server. So, she continues, so both hard copy and digital classified documents. Question. Just so you know, your own perspective on this. Do you believe that what would be more vulnerable? Classified material on a computer server where it's not supposed to be, or hard copies of classified material at someone's house? Answer. Well, if you're talking about more vulnerable to a cyber attack, then obviously you need a computer in order for that to occur. Do you sort of, going further down the line of, whether 793F in particular and the gross negligence standard in particular are unconstitutionally vague, I mean, do you think that DOJ views that as sort of a dead statute that won't be charged anymore? She replies, I do. Are you aware whether or not, she interrupts, I mean, just the gross negligence part of it. I don't have it in front of me, and as I said last week, I'm by no means an expert. Okay, and they stop. There's a little back and forth. Question. So are you aware of whether or not the Bureau ever sought or obtained any sort of compulsory process, whether it's a search warrant or something else, on the basis of 793F in particular? Answer. I think so, but that would not have to have been the gross negligence prong. I think they could have relied on the second prong on F2 right there. Yes. Okay, they agree. So let me just backtrack for a second. So according to Ms. Page, and when it comes to this gross negligence part of the statute, according to her, it's dead in the water. That the FBI and the DOJ, the DOJ will never charge anybody with it, according to her. It's dead. It's a dead statute. But as we make our way through this, and I'm going to have to get through this tomorrow, but as we make our way through this, and as we reconsider what has already been stated, as what we've discussed on this podcast, this was supposedly something that was common. So if it was common, and this was a statute that the FBI and the DOJ routinely go through, why wouldn't they have said to somebody somewhere, a congressman, a senator, a president, the attorney general, get this out there. We don't like this statute. It's going to be incredibly difficult to prosecute somebody on this. You got to take this back to Congress, and you got to have them change the language, because this is serious. This is dealing with matters of national security and potentially at the highest levels of classification, which we find out with Hillary Clinton. Of course, they don't charge her, but that's what they're supposed to do. If you come to a conclusion as an organization, as an agency, whose duty is to protect this country, you better get your act together and say, look, Congress, this is vague. We don't like it. We're never going to be able to charge and prosecute somebody and win on this alone. And this might be all we have in some instance, given the circumstances. You never know. So you have to change the language of this. That seems to me the proper course of action that makes sense in this case. Did that happen? No, it did not. So I'm going to leave it off here. We're going to pick up on this tomorrow, and there's a lot more to get into. Again, not only Lisa Page, but Peter Strzok and Bruce Orr, and I imagine that there's going to be more coming in the not-too-distant future. So again, if you have two brain cells to rub together, you can figure this stuff out, because this is how these people operate. The other thing that's a beauty, and I don't know if you've picked up on this, I know it might be hard just through listening to my voice and not actually having the paper in front of you, but Lisa Page, there's a lot she doesn't know. She wasn't involved in a lot of stuff, but that doesn't stop her at all from answering the question, which I find fascinating. She has no idea, no recollection, and we're going to get into a beauty tomorrow, I hope, in regards to something that she answers that just blew my mind. Like, how are you answering this question? It doesn't make any sense. You said you don't know, or you thought it was this, and now you're going that way. Like, there's some fishy stuff going on. Of course, this is the rats jumping ship and trying to align themselves with other rats to make sure they're in the same boat together. But we're going to get into that. It'll get interesting, believe me when I tell you. So thank you so much, ladies and gentlemen, for joining me today. It's been a pleasure having you. As always, please like, share, subscribe, get the word out. Feel free to leave your comments. I would love to hear from you. This is the Capital News. I am Alex Koritis. Godspeed.